Parents, this is Miss Anderson, and today I'm going to take you through some strategies to use D2L as a tool to support your students' learning. So I'm going to start with some of the tips that we give students in the classroom just so that you can reinforce those messages at home. So we tell our students to check D2L routinely. Daily is ideal. I often recommend that my students check it at the end of the day, right when they get home, or right before they leave school if they need that reminder to bring materials home or whatever else they need. But at the very least, students should be checking D2L a couple times a week. If a student misses classes, they should be checking D2L prior to returning to class, as it gives them some guidelines to anticipate what they'll need to do to catch back up with whatever it was that they missed. And it helps them come in prepared with questions to ask the teacher rather than starting from scratch. If you forget class materials at school, students, you should be checking D2L before giving up on your homework. That's a really important one because often we find that students go home, they realize that they forgot the story they were studying or maybe the note template. But often we post those materials online as well, so there's no need to have a complete work stoppage. They can improvise using the materials on D2L and then figure out a solution for transferring that work over when they get back to school. It's important for students to remember that D2L is not a replacement for in-class instruction. So it's important that students aren't counting on D2L as sort of an online classroom that they can rely on and then instead choose not to come to class. It's different if a student is missing class for reasonable reasons and they're using that as a resource to help them catch back up and they plan to return to class. But this is not a replacement for actually being physically present in the room and accessing instruction from the teacher. It's also important that students know how to submit their assignments properly before they try to do it at home. We often warn students that if they're given time in class to submit an assignment, it's because we're trying to provide support for them with troubleshooting around getting documents uploaded or making sure that their submission folder shows up. And if they leave their assignment for when they get home to submit, then they run the risk of coming right up to the deadline and then not having any support available at home for submitting that assignment on time. The last thing we really encourage students to do is make sure that they're reading the rubric and the feedback that we attach to assignments. So anything that's submitted on D2L can actually be marked on D2L. And if the teacher chooses to do that, often what they'll do is they'll anchor the rubric to the assignment. And then there's also a comment section where we can record or post feedback. And that's a really valuable tool because it allows students to have conversations with their peers or their parents outside of the class about their work as well. In terms of tips for parents, a couple things that I really encourage just to make supporting your student at home less tense, if you will, is come up with an agreed upon schedule for checking D2L. So if you work out when you're going to check out D2L with your student in advance, often that kind of takes the conflict or the fight out of bringing it up at random times and asking students to drop what they're doing and show you what's on D2L. So if students anticipate that it's an expectation, then they'll be more prepared and willing to do it. And then the other hurdle that parents often encounter is that D2L doesn't actually have a parent access login that shows parents everything students see in their course shells. Now, at a high school level, that isn't that much of a problem because students can always access D2L and give a tour to their parents. And that's what I encourage most. Well, some parents will choose to get their student's login and password from the student and access it themselves. I think that sometimes makes students feel like they're being treated as children or they're not the central decision maker in their education and their work. So empowering your student to log in and actually show you what's on D2L makes them feel like they're still behind the steering wheel and they're taking charge as a mature and independent learner. Once you're in D2L, the best place to start is looking at the course announcements. This will often give an overview of what's been going on in class, and oftentimes we'll also link some of the resources right to the announcement rather than you having to browse around looking for them. In some classes, teachers will choose to use the calendar as the starting point. either of these choices are available to you right when you log in on the landing page for the D2L course shell. After your student has taken you in and you've gone through the course announcement and you get an understanding of what's been happening in class, you can then look at the assignments that have been submitted. And I encourage parents to read through the rubrics and the feedback that are attached to student work and ask students to explain how that feedback is relevant to their work. Can they anchor the comments or feedback the teacher gave them to specific parts in their work that show where they need to grow and what they need to do next? And the last thing is just empowering your student in talking to or emailing the teacher to clarify questions or concerns rather than being the intermediary yourself. What that does is it helps, again, the student feel like they're in control of their learning and that conversations aren't happening over their heads or behind their backs between teachers and parents. So having a conversation with a student and helping them come up with a plan for what they need to talk to their teacher about, or even being there to help them draft their email or figure out what they need to say, still helps the student feel like they're in control of advocating for themselves. And that's a really important goal that we have in high school. So before we start our tour of D2L, just a couple important reminders. The first one is that D2L isn't an online course and it doesn't replace in-class participation. Teachers post the resources that they can on D2L, but often these resources don't encompass all the in-person learning and teacher support that happens in the classroom. So students and parents can't expect that absolutely every learning resource in the classroom is available on D2L. The next thing to consider is that teachers do their best to keep D2L up to date, but being in the classroom or talking to the teacher is still your most reliable sources about what's happening in class and what's coming up, because D2L is our secondary priority. Our first priority is that we're present in the classroom, that we're engaging with students during the day when they're in the class, and that we're providing additional support to students as needed. So we use any space in the day we can to keep our D2L up to date, but we can't promise that it's updated in real time. And then the last thing is just remembering that parents and teachers are working together to help the student develop advocacy and personal management skills. So we want to prepare them to graduate from high school with confidence in their ability to ask for what they need, to self-reflect and recognize when they need additional support or guidance. And we also want to empower them in keeping track of their own deadlines, making sure that their learning materials are organized, and knowing what they need to do next to be successful. And if we can work together to do that and use D2L as a support in that process, that's awesome. So now is time for the grand tour. I'm going to open up my D2L landing page, and when your students log into D2L, they will see something similar. They'll see a list of different courses, and we'll open my ELA 10C as the example today. I'm going to change my view so that D2L looks the same for me right now as it would for one of my students logging on. So when my students first arrive, they will see the browser bar at the top with the key links. The most important one to start at is announcements. So if we're on the landing page, you can see announcements, but you can also click the tab up here. On our landing page, you can see that I've got an announcement posted that's outlining what's happening next week. So we've got Monday with some links to some of the resources that we'll be using, and a poorly proofread, that's ironic, a poorly proofread Introduction to Guided Proofreading. And then on Tuesday, again, the next lesson and some of the relevant links. Additionally, often on the sidebar of the D2L page, you'll find access to some of the resources that we use all semester. So here you can see a link to the ELA support room, which runs Thursdays after school. And students can sign up to come in and complete assignments that they've missed if they have teacher approval. They can make up tests that they missed, and they can come in for one-on-one support with writing tasks, with reading comprehension support, and other skills and language arts that they want to work on. Further down, you can see that we've included our teacher contact, some important documents like our course outline, our diversity policy, and our attendance plan. And then even further down, you can see that there's links to some different resources I've put in to help students find the next book that they want to read. Now, every D2L shell will be structured slightly differently, but often you're looking for the announcement on the landing page and then any other crucial resources that the teacher might have put in there. So after going over the schedule with your student, or whatever information the teacher has included in an announcement, I would recommend looking at the content section. Now, in my courses in particular, I try to link the different content we're using each week into the weekly announcements so that students don't have to come here. But this is a really good place to navigate if you want to look back at resources that we've already covered. And you can see how we've organized different units of study or areas of focus. And when you choose a drop-down, you can then see some of the resources that we covered within there. So we've got the assignments, links to some of the lessons that we've covered if we have a lesson summed up in a PowerPoint. Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And then often for texts where we have access to an audio version, we'll post that in there as well. And in language arts in particular, that's a really helpful accommodation for students that have reading fluency challenges, because this gives them the opportunity to take a text we've been engaging with in the classroom and listen to it as they're looking at it, which helps with developing reading fluency. The next section to take note of is the assignment tab. This is where students hand in assignments if we're collecting assignments on D2L. So we can see in my section that I've collected a couple of different assignments. And if a student has submitted one of these, so I'll click the annotation task for instance, they should have a rubric attached to their work. And this is a great place to have a conversation about student work because it will give an overview of what the student scored and how it fits the descriptions of the rubric. And you can then have a look at that piece of work. In this case, students didn't hand it in online, they handed it in person. But it gives you a starting point to have a conversation about student work and what their steps are to move forward, which helps keep some of those conversations more solution focused rather than focused around feelings about how the student did in that particular situation or feelings about how you want them to do in the next one. The other sections, quizzes and rubrics, in this case aren't used really directly in this course. Some other teachers might use them, and some other teachers might have additional links at the top. So anytime you enter a D2L shell with your student, often the first thing to do is to just look through each of the links and figure out what the teachers are using those links for. So I hope that tour was helpful to you and that you're able to use D2L as a great resource to help kind of keep track of what's going on in the class and to support your students in taking charge of their learning. And I hope you have a great day.